Recently, there has been an acknowledgement in the health and fitness community that some that are proposing to be doing things to optimize their health have actually, in fact, been using PEDs or steroids to optimize their health. Now, it's interesting to me that while many individuals have commented about the unethical aspects of this presentation or of this representation by these individuals, what I find that has often been ignored in nearly all of these conversations are the products that are being promoted by these same individuals. And what I'd like to do today is provide you with some insight and just some additional things that you should be thinking about. Because as the unethical nature of how someone presents themselves is, if there is that level of dishonesty, we should also draw into question what other or how far reaching are the dishonest nature of the things that they're selling as well. And while I'm not making an accusation that anyone is outright being dishonest, I do think that there are some important things that you as consumers need to be made aware of that are not immediately obvious to you unless you operate within the business models that these individuals pretend or maybe really do become a part of. Hey guys, I'm Dr. Arland Hill out at Harvest Hills Ranch. And today what I want to offer are two alternatives. Like I said, there have been some recent discoveries around things that individuals have been doing which are unethical and not honest. But I want to talk about this from the product standpoint today. And many of these products that have been promoted are going to fall under a category of what are known as glandulars. And if you, like honestly I did for myself, have been questioning the nature of some of the things that you've heard around these glandulars, I hope if nothing else that this video provides you with some additional insight into ways to think about things. So it gives you some alternatives of maybe what you can do if you're looking for glandular options out there. So the first option that I want to discuss, as well as contrast, is looking at whole food options for these glandular products. We hear about the health benefits associated with these glandulars, and they are different in nutrient composition compared to muscle tissue, but we don't want to hold them on an exceptionally high esteem compared to the muscle tissue. There are going to be some different nutrient profiles here. But for those of you that do have an interest in getting more glandular options into your diet, whole food is an option. Now, many of you might say, I don't want to eat liver, I don't want to eat kidney, and I understand that. So one option that you have at your disposal is using a mix or a grind. Now, I'm going to also talk about a supplemental option as I go further into this video, but what I want to do is I want to start with the whole food option. And so, as I mentioned, I'm out at Harvest Hills Ranch. This is the ranch that my wife Leah and I own. And one of the products that we produce is called our Ancestral Blend. Don't worry about the name. The names are relevant, to be quite honest with you. It's an 85-15 blend of meat and organs. So 15% organs, 85% of your muscle tissue or lean meat as a part of that grind. Now, here's what I want to talk about this. This is not a video to promote what we produce at Harvest Hills Ranch. This is a video to, again, provide you with options and to give you things to think about as you consider some of these options that are out there. So number one is you have these, if you're having some questions about the supplements that are or have been in the marketplace and some of the ethics around these, the thing that we hear with a lot of these products is that these animals are derived from New Zealand and from Australia. And unquestionably, and I learned this as we started ranching, that many of the things that we do incorporate here on the ranch, many of the aspects of regenerative agriculture did have their initial roots in New Zealand and in Australia, but they have been refined. They're still doing great things over there, but they've been refined as they've come to the United States. And currently within the United States, we're in a very significant regenerative agriculture boom in the United States. So as we hear about these great techniques that happen overseas and how these animals are reared and raised, we also need to acknowledge that there are farms in the United States that are doing the same thing as well. So it's not this absolute necessity to have to go outside of the country to get a high-level glandular product if that's where your focus is. I also find it interesting that when you're doing a contrast with these supplemental products, that one of the recent ones, one of the ones of recent that should have come into question, is actually manufactured in Willis, Texas, which just so happens I live in Texas. I actually live probably an hour and 45 minutes from Willis, Texas. It's not uncommon for me to go through there when I'm on my way to Houston. And I know for a fact, just knowing the community around me, that there are regenerative agricultural farms in that area, and as well as all throughout East Texas and other parts of Texas as well. Of course, you can extend beyond the borders of just Texas. But my point on this is that many of these products these products that we're talking about on the supplemental side are manufactured in Willis, Texas, and coming from outside of the U.S. Why not just work with the farms that are doing things the right way within that local community instead of having to bring things from outside of that community? So that's one thing that I would consider in this. You have local resources near you that have these glandular options that you're likely not even aware of and taking an interest in, and you just need to look for them. Many regenerative agriculture farms are going to have a storefront, and they're going to put this information on their website. Here's the other thing that I've recently noticed, that being in the ranching community, I have relationships with other ranchers, and they send me information for all of us to stay aware of. And one of the things that we are led to believe is that these animals that are raised in New Zealand and Australia don't have, they all live in these pristine environments. They don't have some of the same considerations in those countries that we have here. And there's really no risk of exposure with these animals to toxins and other things that we would find less than ideal to have in our food supply. But that's not actually the case. In fact, here's a recent article that came out in November of 2022, where there's legislative concerns that are affecting farms in New Zealand. So literally, the government is starting to put a hand in how farmers are raising their animals, and they're doing this under the context of climate. And so, for example, one of the things that they're proposing, let me actually give you 3 things that they're proposing to try to reduce methane. And I don't think anyone that understands raising animals in an ethical, humane manner and raising them in the context of which God designed should be in favor of any of these things. So number one, looking at vaccines to reduce methane exposure. So we're finding another justification for vaccinating these animals. We don't hear anything about that. And for any of you that know, vaccines come with things in the product that many of us don't find ideal. They're also, number 2, using inhibitors to dampen methane microbes. So these microbes that have a greater propensity for producing methane, they're using components or parts, they're adding things to the diet to inhibit those specific group of microorganisms from producing more methane. And then number 3 here is that there's a consideration, one of the things that's being looked to introduce are genetically modified feed to reduce methane. And they're specifically looking at doing this with clovers, the plant type clovers, the legume. And so right there's 3 different things that are occurring, or 3 different considerations, legislative considerations that are being looked at in New Zealand that we don't have to deal with here in the United States. And so when you hear these ideas about you have a better product that's coming from New Zealand or Australia, you may have a good product, but it doesn't mean that you can't find the same level or quality of product here if you just do a little bit of looking around. So what I would suggest for you is you can visit these farms in the United States. Look for where they're grass-fed and grass-finished animals that are hormone-free. They're rotationally grazing the animals. There's a higher nutrient density in the product. Those are the things that you're looking for, and a little bit of legwork on the internet is going to provide that for you. Now, as I stated, there's 2 options that I wanted to present to you. So that was the first option. It's the whole foods. You're still looking at consuming the gland of the animal in a food-based product. All right. Well, some of you still aren't going to want to do that, and that's fine. That's not for everybody. So that takes us to the supplemental option here. And what I want to do with the supplemental option on this, because you can find several different outlets out there, several different vendors, if you will, that provide organs in a supplemental form. There's going to be bovine options for that. There's going to be porcine options. There's going to be ovine options. That's sheep, if you're not familiar with that term. There's all kind of different options out there on this. But here's a couple of things that you need to think about with these different glandulars. So one, does the age of the animal matter? And the answer to that is yes, the age of the animal matters when it comes to looking at the tissue and the viability of that tissue. Again, we're talking about organ tissue. We're not talking about skeletal muscle tissue on these animals. And so when we look at these animals that are coming in from out of the country, they're going through routine slaughter channels, there's going to be all kind of varying ages. Some of these animals are under 30 months. Some of these animals are over 30 months. And I'm using 30 months because within the United States, by USDA regulations, the animal has to be processed differently based on concerns around BSE, or what some of you might call bovine spongiform encephalitis. The common name for that is mad cow disease. So we process those animals differently. You can get different cuts if it's a younger animal versus if it's an older animal. So age does play a factor in this, and even the USDA acknowledges that. And that also comes into the conversation when we start to talk about the glands themselves. So if we're looking at animals that are older, there's going to be more fatty infiltration in those glandular tissues. Now, some are going to argue on this that you don't want to defat those tissues. And okay, there's a point you can make with that. However, what you also need to consider is that as these animals get older, tissues, just like as in humans, they're going to become more senescent. And so that means that those tissues aren't going to be as functional. They're not going to be as viable. And we want to acknowledge that, because if you're taking those glandular products with the expectation that it's going to support your own glandular tissue, age matters. It just frankly matters, just like it does in a human. And so that fatty infiltration, that fatty tissue, while it may have a optimal fatty acid profile, if you're taking it for the glandular aspect of it to nourish your own inherent tissues, your own glandular tissues, there's going to be a difference there. You're not going to get the same effect out of that older animal as compared to a younger animal. So the point being on this is that when it comes to these supplemental options, one of the things that you should be looking for on this what are the things you can look for on this is what are known as neonatal tissues. And neonatal tissues, these are going to be of younger animals, typically 6 months or less. These are animals that are more pristine tissues, non-senescent. They're still more viable, more active. They've had less opportunity to be exposed to toxicity in the environment or have potential for bioaccumulation. And so if you're looking for a neonatal tissue and you're getting a neonatal tissue, there's less risk of these other concerns that you don't get with these varying ages of animals that are going through a traditional channel. These neonatal animals are typically ones that are headed for the veal market as far as their skeletal muscle tissue, but that's certainly different than an older animal. So animal age matters is point number one here as it relates to the supplemental form on this. The second thing that you need to know is private labeling. And private labeling is a concept that is not unique to the nutritional industry. It is a concept that applies to multiple industries out there. This is the clothing industry does this. My gosh, most industries do private labeling. But as it relates to supplements that we're talking about here, again, we're led to believe that these products are only that they're coming from Australia and New Zealand, and that's really where the conversation ends at. And the reality is that that's not the case. And so, for example, you'll see on this that when we look at a recent product here that has been under scrutiny, you'll see that it is manufactured in the USA for. And so that means that entity that it's being manufactured for is not the one that's actually producing that product. They're depending on someone else to produce that product for them. And we don't know what the ability, what the skill set, what the standards are for that entity that is private labeling for the said company that is promoting their product. This is also interesting to me because for the one that I'm referencing here in this video, we actually did, since, like I said, I live close to Willis, Texas, we actually got curious and looked up the website for this business and found the actual physical address and went and found out that this is a residential address. There's no business that is occurring in this area. So unless someone is making this in their garage or in their shed behind their home, then it's being done elsewhere and sent to this entity in Willis, and then, or the entity in Willis is just simply the address of business. There's nothing happening there. So it's not actually fully transparent to tell you what's going on. Third point on this is we hear oftentimes about this notion of third-party testing. Everything needs to be third-party tested. And there's some problems with this as well. It doesn't mean that third-party testing is not something that should be utilized, but it does mean that third-party testing is not the end-all be-all. What would be more ideal is for a manufacturer to actually have an in-house laboratory. And if you're solely depending on the third-party laboratory, that tells me you don't have an in-house laboratory. Now, why is that important? Well, if you're being upfront and honest and you're assessing your product, your raw materials at the beginning of the manufacturing process to make sure that they are of the standard that you say they are, they go through the manufacturing process, and then at the end of the manufacturing process, you're checking those things again. To do that, you need an in-house laboratory. You can't just keep sending stuff out and waiting for it to come back. There's too great of a time delay there to solely depend on third-party laboratories. The other thing about this is that these companies often will say, if they have a third-party laboratory, that we got a certificate of analysis from this laboratory. Certificates of analysis are good, but most of them are limited in the information that they're going to provide. They're going to give you information about microbiology and about toxicology. So heavy metals, these types of things, different microbes that you want to see, that you don't want to see in the final product. But what they're not telling you is what is the nutrition of that product? What is the nutritional standard in that product? Did it meet a certain minimum label claim? They don't provide that in these certificates of analysis. And then, additionally, as it relates to these third-party testing options, the question we should ask on this is, with this outside third party, do you use the same third-party laboratory group all the time? Is it the same lab that you're always sending things to, or are you sending things to different labs? And this may seem like I'm kind of being nitpicky about this, but this definitely happens. And the question you have to ask is, when something goes to a third-party laboratory, is who is validating the methodology for that third-party laboratory to actually make sure it is to the standard to look for the specifics that we are interested in looking for with the product that is going to that laboratory. And so these standards or these methodologies can differ if there's no uniformity or if there is no benchmark that these laboratories are adhering to or setting themselves up to. So you may ask on this, well, you've mentioned these alternatives. You mentioned this neonatal aspect of the product actually being more transparent when it comes to who's manufacturing the product and how to apply third-party testing and where third-party testing really doesn't apply. So what is a source that I trust on this? And this is where I wanted to give you this second recommendation. And the source that I trust for these glandulars is going to be Biotics research. Now, why is that? Well, there's a couple of specific reasons that I would recommend this if you're looking for a glandular product. The first is that Biotics research has what's known as an ISO certified laboratory. So they have to adhere to international standards. And ISO has to validate the methodology that is occurring in that facility's, in Biotics Research's laboratory, which is an in-house laboratory. So they're looking at these products, the raw ingredients prior to production. They're looking at in production when it makes sense to do that. And they're definitely looking at it post-production as well. So 2 definitely, and sometimes 3 depending on the product that's being produced. I mentioned the neonatals, which are a more pristine tissue, hasn't had the level of bioaccumulation, hasn't had some of the additional concerns there. Biotics research is using these neonatal tissues. The second reason that I would look to these is that they are trusted by clinicians, not just myself as a clinician, but other clinicians as well. And I wanted to share with you, this is the current issue of the Townsend Letter. This is December of 2022. And you'll see here, this is Dr. Alan McDaniel. I don't know Dr. McDaniel, but I did find the article that he presented in this publication to be interesting. And as I was scrolling through it, Dr. McDaniel presents 4 different patients in regards to some hormone work that he's doing. And I was looking through in what he was prescribing to these patients, and he was prescribing to these patients glandulars from Biotics research, products that Biotics just uses the name Cytozyme for these products. But this is a medical provider who's trying to specifically get results with hormones with his patient and look for a direct clinical outcome. And this is who he puts his trust into. This is who I've used. This is who a lot of clinicians use. I've actually read other articles in this same publication where practitioners mention the application of these glandular products as well. The point being from this entire conversation is that if you have looked at what's going on out there in the health and wellness space, and you see the dishonesty and the unethical nature that is being promoted by many, and it makes you want to question what they're recommending from a supplemental standpoint, you definitely should be justified in questioning what you're seeing out there. And I wanted to provide you 2 options. One, I wanted to provide you with a whole food options, which is look for those products, those combination, those mixes of grind and glandular products from different farms out there. Harvest Hills Ranch does it. Numerous other farms out there do it as well. So find one that's local to your area. And then also, I wanted to provide a supplemental option that I've had personal experience with, that I've seen other practitioners have personal experience with, and that's the Cytozyme or the neonatal glandular products from Biotics Research. So this video was not meant to denigrate anyone in any way. It was really a video that, as I looked at what was happening out there in this space, I recognized that you as the consumer were not being told things that were important for you to know about, and I wanted you to have more information to make a more educated decision out there. If you found this information helpful, by all means, hit the like button, get this out there in the algorithm so other individuals can hear and see this information as well. And come back to the channel, find out more about what we're doing out here at Harvest Hills Ranch, find out more about how I'm helping patients and how we can share this information to get more educated, more health and wellness minded individuals out there. Until next time, guys, I'm Dr. Arland Hill. We'll see you soon.